Welcome. 2 things I discovered this week while doing my reading course. Anyways, we moved on to a new book. This is Mixed Media, Feminist Presses and Publishing Politics by Simone Murray, and it is mostly about the feminist presses from like the 60s and 70s, but this book was published in 2001, so it kind of goes into the 80s and 90s too. The reason why I wanted to read this book is because it gives a lot of context to feminist publishing efforts in the 60s and 70s, which is when Ursula K. Le Guin published. And 2 of the presses she's kind of talked about mostly so far and what I've read are Virago and the Women's Press. And Ursula K. Le Guin did have books published from both of them, but not like original books. Like she had some compiltations published with them, and kind of like later in the 90s. But I am interested in some of the later chapters more than the ones I've read so far, but there is one thing that I thought was very interesting because it kind of gives some insight, which is there's a quote from someone who worked with one of these, or an editor, Ruth, let me give her credit, Ruth Katrier, just kidding, I can't say her last name. She said, in those days, the mid-1970s, we all thought our politics were based in non-fiction writing and issue-related titles. Fiction is what you gave yourself as a source of pleasure and distraction. It wasn't going to offer a commentary on life in quite the same way. Which speaks to the fact that both the Virago and the Women's Press did publish a lot of fiction. Virago published older fiction and the Women's Press kind of published newer fiction, but neither of them published any, or not any, but neither of them published a significant amount of science fiction and fantasy. They published very few titles in those categories. And one of the people they published was Joanna Russ, who was a feminist science fiction author, and she was also like a feminist critique commentator, and she came up in another reading I did by Margaret J.M. Ezell, and because she wrote a book called How to Suppress Women's Writing, which seems interesting. Maybe I'll read it someday. I've never read Joanna Russ's books, not because of any dislike, I just have never read her books. Maybe I will someday too. But in the cover of the book, one of the things it has on it is she wrote it, but she isn't really an artist, and it isn't really art. It's a thriller, a romance, a children's book. It's sci-fi. And I think that speaks to like the blind spot in feminist critique and theory towards science fiction and fantasy. It's so annoying because it's such a good source for theory. Like, it is the ultimate source for theory because it's like a metaphor. It's presented in a way that you can really understand it because it's not presented about yourself. Like, it removes that barrier. And the other thing I want to show you is I started making a scrapbook. It's not a zine because that is classist and elitist, and I'm a scrapbooker. I've never made a fucking zine in my life. I'm a scrapbooker. This is a little book that I actually made as part of a workshop, but I started to make a little thing about feminist bibliography. We have this really cool print or lithograph, I don't know, it's from an Italian book of icons, and it was included in another article I read by Werner this week, and I really liked it, and I really loved the book that it was from because it was just a really cool book of all these like Italian 17th century icons for things, and a lot of them are women. So this is Women as a Printer, and I made some little pages about feminist bibliography, and I have, you know, the communication circuit, but it's rainbow. And I'm doing this because feminist bibliography said that you needed to use methods that, you know, are creative and interesting, and to me that means scrapbooking. I just love to scrapbook. For what I'm reading this week, you're gonna have to stay tuned because I'm actually about to do a haul because I just got some new books and I thought, why don't I show you guys what I've been reading? On that note, I did finally finish Dragonquest #2 in the Dragon Riders of Pern trilogy, the first one, and let me tell you, this is why we need bibliographers, because the way you have to read this series, which is like a total of like over 20 books, right? You need to read the first 2 books of the first trilogy, then you have to read the first 2 books of the second trilogy, then you have to go back and read the 3rd book of the first trilogy, and then you have to read the 3rd book of the second trilogy. Yeah. I don't even know why they're in trilogies like that. Because girl, it could have just been one series in order. But anyways, stay tuned for my haul, stream Brat by Charlie XCX, and I will see you guys next week.